Hi, everybody. This is Steve Sablatowski, publisher of BayouBuzz.com. And today we have, I think, a really interesting guest, an author who's actually talking my language, which is politics, technology, internet, data. And I'm really excited. I was really looking forward to talking to Josef Ansorge, if I have the name correct.
That's good. That's good.
And so, Josef, tell us about the book that you, the title of the book, and just give me an overview, and then let's talk about your background, so we get much better idea in terms of why you got involved with this in your book. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Stephen. The book is called Identify and Sort: How Digital Power Changed World Politics, and it comes out of a PhD I did from 2007 to 2011. I kept on then working on the subject and try to revise it, make it a bit more sexy, make it more accessible, because parts of it really read like political theory and kind of international relations history. And I then finally completed it close to, I think, half a year ago. That's when I figured out how to end it. I'd been sitting on a contract on publishing it for a while, but I work as an attorney and it was quite demanding, and I also couldn't figure out a happy way to end it. I had my initial version, everything had been kind of doom and gloom, and there wasn't any meaningful space for public resistance or political organizing in the face of overwhelming state power when it came to information technology. But I still managed to come up with a few proposals in the end and just take us to a bit more kind of happy-clappy, it's all going to be fine approach at the end. So I decided to kind of study this and to work on it after I'd spent close to 2 years working in Liberia on the security sector reform of the armed forces of Liberia. And what I saw there, I regarded as a model for something that was happening in a lot of other places, is that pretty important decisions about how citizens were being represented, either by what kind of ethnicity or whether their domicile was more important than where they were born. Those kind of determinations were being made within closed spaces where they could not access them or participate in them in a meaningful conversation. And that led me down many different routes of research and took me to writing this book. And what I tried to do in it is take a step back from some of the current obsession about the capacity of the NSA today and put us into a bit of more historical context and look at some previous breakthroughs of identifying technologies and talk about whether those radically change the political configuration. The takeaway punchline would be that our theories of political power come from a time when the political authority really had books and archives. It was a very slow-moving kind of political power if we think of its effectiveness. Hobbes and Machiavelli are writing about a sovereign which there's a book, but it takes a long time to look somebody up and to figure things out. The world we're in right now is radically different in that sense, where the political authority and also private actors, but political authority can create a representation of you that's so specific, Stephen, that in some ways it knows you better and differently than you know yourself. And I'm interested in exploring that space because it's a potential space of alienation where the government sees and thinks about me in ways in which I don't see and think about myself. And I think that's something that's going to continue to become very interesting.
Sure. Now, you mentioned the government. Now, one of the things that I thought was really kind of interesting is that we have a presidential election coming up, and obviously, the candidates want to know more about us as much as we want to know about them. And it's not just the presidential candidates. It's also we have a U.S. Senate race, U.S. Senate races. We have congressional races, and we have other elections within the states. So, based upon your research, your writing, what are we looking at in terms of that particular space?
Yeah. So I entirely agree with you that they want to know us, but I would only add that they want to know us for a very specific purpose. So it's an instrumental kind of knowledge, right? Because they want to bring out a vote on a specific date, which means that they're not interested in the poetry I've written, right? They're not interested in my wasted romance or my weird years, or no, those elements aren't really interesting. What's interesting are all the variables that might bear on how I could vote that they can capture. We've lost anonymity in a way in which we're not fully aware of it yet, right? A lot of our data it doesn't require spying to find out a huge amount about people, and much of it is for sale by marketing organizations, and also by organizations that provide a kind of background check service to the corporate industry. So if you want to hire somebody, it's much cheaper to have a dedicated kind of third party you work with, and they go out and they do a background check. Now, these industries have been drawn on to generate a kind of a data baseline for each individual voter. In 2008, Obama campaign is regarded as the most significant breakthrough in this regard. It's also one of the ones we know the most about because it's in the past now, so people are willing to talk about it. And it's regarded as such a resounding success that it was seen as a kind of validation of the model. So let me talk about that one a little bit.
Sure.
And then we have to bear in mind that what they're doing right now is more sophisticated, but not that much more sophisticated.
Really? Okay.
So, I mean, the overall parameters are the same, but it's not a totally different world. At its most sophisticated, when it's really humming at full speed, we have 100 different factors per person. And the factors could be, education, where you went to school, where you live, kind of purchase history, right? Gender, I mean, all kinds of different information. If they can match it with maybe some of the Democratic kind of voting poll records, they could also lay over how and where you had previously voted. And that's a baseline which is then kind of refined and validated on a daily basis because you have a huge network of people who are knocking on doors and making phone calls. And that network of people has been given a list that you should check out on these folks because we're guessing, that they are pro-pick, like pro-Obama 4 out of 5. We want to make sure they're registered. We want to make sure that they're coming. So let's go and talk to them. Then when you send these people out to go and knock on folks' door or call them, if they find that they're not 4 out of 5 Obama, that actually these guys are hardcore McCain, you feed that back, right, to headquarters and into the cycle. And in that way, it's a representation of the American electorate that is continually updated and validated. I think it's the most sophisticated social scientific study ever conducted, although it's done, of course, for very specific instrumental purposes. So that's it at its most sophisticated iteration in 2008. The main differences, I think, as we're continuing and moving along is what we had discussed about before. I think we turned on the camera, which was that so much of this current campaign is taking place on our own social media streams, where it is mediated by kind of local decentralized influencers. I don't follow Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton on social media, but I hear a lot about them because my friends do, and they retweet it and they bring it in. So there's different kinds of echo chambers in which that information cycles. And I think the next iteration, the more successful breakthrough, is one that then specifically targets those people, the influencers, and seeks to ensure their vote or seeks to have a better understanding of who they're for. Because if they're not for your candidate and you thought they were, then you don't want to waste any more resources on that person, right? You don't want to call them to remind them about the election because in worst case scenario, they're just going to go out and vote for the other person, right? Mm-hmm. In the same sense, if they're totally committed, if they're 5 out of 5 for your candidate, you also don't have to expend a huge amount of resources because maybe you send them 1 or 2 reminders, but they're kind of self-executing. This is probably going to happen. They're going to vote for your guy or girl. The middle field, the 3 out of 5, that's where you concentrate your resources. That's where you invest your money. You try to find them, you talk to them, you bring them in. And that leads to a differentiated experience for the voting electorate, right? So some are ignored, some are focused on, some are almost harangued because they're seen as reliable. And it's a kind of differentiation that, you know, we had not foreseen, and nor have we debated on whether we're fine with it as an electorate. Because maybe we want our candidates to have to represent themselves with a unified face. And this is something we're still going to have to come to an agreement on. Maybe we want them to say, well, I don't want Donald Trump sending a letter to somebody in America and not also sending me that letter. I want to see what goes to everybody. Right? It's a possible solution. I don't know what the solution will be. I do know, however, that it's not something that we've discussed as a society. And it's an interesting space and aspect that needs to be observed, because the pernicious characteristic of this, and it's more pernicious in other realms of life, but it is also within the political campaign, is that you can now capture and represent individuals and put them into groups without them realizing that they're in that group. And you can act on that group without them realizing that they're in that group. So it's like being in a group, but there not being group consciousness around it. Now, there's no real discrimination in this field, but there are in others. So, and if you're discriminating against this group that doesn't think of itself as a group, how are they going to resist? We're not going out and saying, hey, all the black women, you're not allowed to vote. That's a kind of real obvious fatal discrimination, which our both constitutional tradition and civil society have learned to respond to. They've figured out figured out how to recognize it, how to mobilize against it, how to respond to it. If you're saying, no, this particular person, they're not allowed to fly, why? Well, no, it's for up to 100 different factors. We don't know how they're weighted. They're weighted in different ways. They're changing at all times. One of them might be their religion. It could be that some aspect of them is a protected class, and that somehow factors into this, but we don't really know how it does. In that group, then, it doesn't really have a central thing to organize around, because they might not even know that they're in that group, right? Mm-hmm. They might not even have consciousness of it, but they also don't know what defines that group outside of that particular moment of discrimination. And that's what I think is most fascinating about this for me. It's like power comes up with ways to overcome resistance to power. And one of the ways is you get just much smarter about how you're targeting and who you're focusing on. And that's what I try to talk about in this book.
Okay, so going back a little bit, and what I find really interesting is a lot interesting, quite frankly, but one thing I'd like to at least bring up is the relationship between the online world and the offline world that you discussed. For example, what you were talking about was being able to obtain information, try to separate, distinguish, and then in terms of all the data points that are out there, and then take that information and to funnel it to whether it's the telephone or whether it's the walking campaigns or whatever it may be. So how I guess question number one is, how is that done? If, for example, I have a Facebook group, it's called Louisiana Politics. We talk about, you can imagine it's a closed group, but we talk about, things dealing with Louisiana politics as well as world and U.S. politics. So
how do you convert that into real political action?
Like how would, say, Trump and or Clinton, for example, be able to use that information and then to take that information into the real world of being able to get out the vote?
So in the way it's currently configured, I think that the only way in which that information becomes useful is if membership is correlated to a particular kind of opinion. And they can say, hey, one of the factors about Stephen is he's also in this Facebook group, and we know the membership. And it turns out whenever we ask people from that Facebook group, where they are, and we're trying to poll them, or we've called folks, we've gone to their house, we found that either they're really for or against a particular candidate. So we can use that information to refine, and now we're not going to have to call Stephen's friend, who's also in that group, we're going to delimit our resources, and going forward, that's how we can, try to turn out the vote. But that's because the information that is being sought, and this is what I try to stress in the beginning, is currently for a very specific instrumental purpose, and that's November, right? It's one thing, everything is aiming for that. So all the information is like, the question that is asked of it is it useful or not for November? It does, however, have an afterlife. And Organizing for America, or Organizing for Action, is the organization that came out of the Obama campaign. And they have many different resources, but one of them is an email list of 12 million who they identify as pretty hardcore supporters for Obama, who they would try to mobilize in different moments where they require political support. Sign up for health care. Call your congressman. So even subsequently, it becomes a tool. And knowing that you have this list of 12 million people is something extremely valuable. So everything aims towards November, but there's an afterlife to it as well. And we should be important to note that that information which the campaigns have is different from the information that the parties have, right? So the parties will have voter lists, they'll have databases, but the information that a campaign has is at once much more sophisticated and more in real time, because they've also gone through the work of in this iteration, purchasing, right, the marketing history, the background checks, all the other layers.
Which raises an interesting question. I mean, the thing is that Donald Trump, as we know, has a pretty skeletal campaign, and although obviously he's doing extremely well despite that, but he's relying upon, in many regards, he's relying upon the Republican Party database and their infrastructure.
Yeah, which historically already has not been that great.
Right.
So it wasn't just the Republican Party, but it was, the Romney campaign had to develop their own, which famously failed at a crucial time in the lead up to the election. So I think he's on a real back foot in that regard. And it's so fascinating to contrast his prowess at influencing the 24-hour media cycle and how good he is with that Twitter. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
He's very good at that. He owns a space, and he's managed to turn the campaign into a 24-hour event, which it used to not be. And I think the Clinton campaign has been slow on that. Clinton campaign, however, has a real head start on the logistics of this other kind of information technology we've been discussing. Not only did she run in 2008 already and have her own database at that time, right? So there's a baseline you can add to, but they've had much more money for much longer and had much more of an infrastructure for much longer. They've had some of the same important players who are involved with the Obama campaign are helping design this. So we can, I'm confident that she will have a huge head start when it comes to that kind of information technology.
Yeah. Now, is it fair to say that, and I don't know this, even though I do internet law, I don't know whether or not Facebook is actually grabbing, say, data from, say, closed groups. Do you have any information on that?
Oh, I'm convinced they're grabbing everything. I don't think they've yet to properly commodify it, and they're very wary of doing it for political purposes. But I'm convinced they're grabbing all of that, which is
okay.
Which is one reason why I think the next iteration will be, where that information technology becomes so personal again, where they focus on the people in my group of friends, and that's where the resources are focused. So it's much more fine-grained than 5 categories for the whole country, right? That will seem really rudimentary when you can sit and think of, well, look, this person has so many other kind of friends, and this person has so many other influencers, and they all turn to this particular individual. That's somebody we should be focusing our energies on.
So between, say, you mentioned Twitter and Facebook, do you have an opinion as to which is the most powerful for a candidate?
So as the broadcasting platform, Trump has made Twitter incredibly powerful, right?
Sure.
And it's and for me at least, an entirely unexpected turn of events, because my basic premise for politics is always like, it's complicated. We need a footnote. Let's think about this. And it's not 140 characters can somehow provide, an apt position or summation, but that's taken off like crazy. So for the actual representation of the character, right, of a kind of getting out, creating a heroic image of yourself, Twitter is right now without parallel. I think Facebook is, it will be, because that's the more closed group, right? In Twitter, you often follow different celebrities. We have a very different experience and usership of Twitter usually. It's a Twitter stream. I'm reading all kinds of different things. Facebook, at least for me, and I think most of my peers, the core of it is constituted by my friends still.
Sure. Right.
So it's exactly within that next iteration, we're focusing on the opinion leaders in your own intimate circle of friends.
Sure.
Becomes instrumental and important that Facebook, again, will achieve a very significant political function. So my answer, final answer, Twitter now and Facebook tomorrow in terms of for campaigns of what's the most important.
That's really, really interesting. In terms of, and I'm assuming that all the tweets that we engage in are also going to be farmed by, in this case, politicians, but in the broadest sense, the business community and government.
Yeah, I mean, we lose our reasonable expectation of privacy when we broadcast in that form, and we don't think of it in terms of creating a continuous record, but that is what we do, and we do so with these kind of technologies where we frankly give away our anonymity for the most banal things. It's like, oh, I'm out here having lunch and took a picture of my lunch. I've geotagged the picture.
Right.
Everybody knows where I was what I was eating, and I've created a public record of it forever because it seems to me to be innocent, unnecessary information, but we never know for what ends information is used, and that which appears to be anonymous often turns out to not be anonymous. And a very important example of that is geolocation data for cell phones, and where they were made public, and the European court had struggled with this a long time because all of European privacy law is based on the distinction that things that are anonymous can be made public. It's fine, the state can have them. But if something is not anonymous, right, if you can really trace it to Joey or to Stephen, then no, we're not going to do that. In this case, however, which appeared to be anonymous, which is just these streams of random numbers, actually all you had to do was correlate it with a few people's kind of Instagram posts saying, hey, I'm over here with my cell phone, and oh, okay, that number was there at that time. And then you have another one, and with three of them, you suddenly can make sense of the most complex and overwhelming anonymous field of numbers. And it turns into actually a tracking device for the entire population. So there's, we give away a lot. Even now we currently know what we give away, but I think we give away even more than we understand, because this is yet to be fully farmed, correlated, connected with all the other information out there, right?
It's, I taught attorneys internet and internet law, and one of the things I used to say is that the smoking digital document is impossible to destroy. Mm-hmm. Now, that was before the advent of social media. Mm-hmm. And we were just talking about servers, we were just talking about computers, we were talking about email, but now with social media, and back then, there was an incredible fear of doing anything where any information is going to be able to be farmed, extracted. Now it's almost like a rite of spring and a rite of manhood, and that is that if you're not tagging, if you're not letting people know who you are, where you are, so the whole mindset, in a sense, has changed, and we're not concerned about it at all.
Yeah, and I wonder whether that connects with, this spate of kind of confessionals we've been seeing, because it used to be, at least this is my understanding of it, like, oh, okay, you served in the CIA, nobody really knew about that. Or you were in the SEALs, nobody really knew about that. And suddenly there's a sort of like, hey, I was there, a presentation of self that's become very important within our political space, that I think is tied to kind of the selfie generation. That look at me, I'm over here. Why isn't anybody paying attention to me? And I feel like they're all interrelated, because it's changing how we view ourselves and how we view each other, right? I mean, the younger generation, and this missed me, but for my younger cousins, right, they date entirely through different apps.
Is that right?
And, that's how they meet each other. So they first see an image of each other, like a representation, before they meet in real life, very frequently. And that's different. It's going to be for future anthropologists to figure out what that has turned us into.
So taking that and thinking out loud, I mean, the more that, say, that you engage in that space, then the more that other, say, date apps are going to be able to use that information and to make that dating experience or that connecting experience that much more opportune.
Yeah.
For everybody, not just for the app people, but
sure.
Those people who are
if what we want is the whole CV of the person for our dating, sometimes, and I guess we probably do, we want perfect information when we're dating somebody. But there's also different ways of living are possible and have existed. One where, like, you take this person at their word, and this is who they say they are. This is how they represent themselves to you. And we kind of permitted a bit more plasticity to, they are agents of how they are seen by the world. Because right now, if somebody goes down and creates a website and says Joey's an asshole, like, I mean, I can get at it, but it's a lot of work. It's really difficult. So I've lost the vestige, at least, of control of my own public persona. And it's something that's co-generated by other people.
So government, I mean, that is, the big brother probably, wasn't even born in 1984 and is not born yet. Okay. But we're creating Big Brother, without doubt. And, what, you have any idea in terms of what we're doing in the creation of this mega monster?
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas about Big Brother in particular. So the first, which I always try to emphasize, is to understand how cheap all this has become. Because there's always been fantasies of total information and control. And one of the things I discuss in this book, actually, I found in an archive a 1930s proposal sent to Hitler to create a huge tower and a representation in which each German would be represented by one index card. And there'd be all these rules, and there's like a staff of thousands of people, and they're moving the index cards around, and you're filling up and updating where they are. And what it was is kind of a manual database, but it was, insanely expensive and almost like Don Quixote, kind of like just craziness to try to pull something like that off. There have been a lot of ideas like that in the past. Like, I want a record of everybody's ear, because the ears are really individual. And once I have a record of anybody's ear, I'll know that, hey, this guy I found here, his name is actually not Josef Ansorge. This is a guy who's a criminal who's wanted in this other state. And there have been plans for that for a very long time. And they've encountered thresholds. Some of them are civil society thresholds and constitutional limitations, but some are just straight up, it's too expensive and crazy. Like, we can't do that. We can't afford to create a whole ministry that goes around measuring everybody's ears, and that then creates an identity. Like, we're not going to do that, right? And we're now in a current moment where that threshold no longer exists. Something that would have been very expensive, very complicated, difficult to engineer, right? To actually surveil everybody, to do it properly, I mean, you need an agent for each person. It's impossible. It's way too expensive.
Sure.
To create an algorithm that tracks the person's discourse and movement is not expensive at all, right? And to go out and to have to research where each person went to college, wow, that's really expensive and a lot of work. But if that person just puts it out on LinkedIn,
Sure.
it's a push of a button. So there's a real change where that which was difficult and aspirational, I think, for state agents at different times who had fantasies of total insight and not even control, but just I need to understand, like, where is everybody? Where are they going? Is getting closer, and it's become much closer. And I think the truth behind it will be that information actually doesn't deliver what you were hoping. I think it'll show the limitations of that. You can't actually know the person by knowing where they went to school or even by knowing what they put on Facebook. People are mysterious beyond that.
So that gets to the title of your book, Identify and Sort.
Yeah.
So, I have written a lot about the incredible connection between, and talking about what you were just talking about, the just incredible quantum connection between, say, Schindler's List,
mm-hmm.
and what a madman or what a nation can do with that same information. Think of this, the slaughter of 6 million people,
mm-hmm.
the slaughter of more than that, obviously, in terms of other ethnicities and other demographies. But this was done, as you said a card. This was done with pencil. This was done with typewriter. I mean,
mm-hmm.
that's how that was conducted.
Although there were IBM sorting machines as well.
Were they using it?
Yeah, there were also.
Okay,
but you're exactly right. This was done by people with analog technology.
Yeah, exactly.
There's many catastrophic things, of course, about the Holocaust, and I'm German. I don't know if I told you. So it's something we study closely and struggle with, and have for a long time. And so it's something or I at least have spent a lot of time researching and looking at. And one of the elements that has connected to polling with me a little bit, or to censuses, is that there's a very important census in the 1930s in Germany where they go out and they ask for people to fill in their religious affiliation, whether they're Jewish or not, but they go through a performance of hiding it and putting it like in an anonymous letter. They're saying, hey, this one I won't look at. This will actually go here because this is private information. But the agents doing it were instructed to, the moment they leave the apartment, pull it out and make a note of it. So there was a kind of a way in which the entire state engaged in extracting sensitive information and lied to the public when they did so. About their religious affiliation.
I'm sorry, go on.
I'm saying, and that, think of what that requires. It's a huge undertaking. But if they're all on Facebook saying that, this is the synagogue I attend,
mm-hmm.
you don't even have to do that. You're not even sending a person out anymore or anything like that.
Right.
We've made things public that used to be closely guarded.
Right. I mean, absolutely. And we're creating these digital agents to go out there to grab the information and then to come back and then, as identify in terms of like you said in your book, and then sort, electronically sort.
Yeah.
All this information. And I mean, if you just look at the dichotomy of, say what happened, now 80 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
60 years.
Yeah. And what the potential is now. And so that gets me to, I guess, one last area, and that deals with the issue of the banning of the Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
The Trump banning of the Muslims. It's my opinion that is impossible to do okay, because like you said, people are going to hide, they're going to pretend they're not Muslim, okay? They're going to pretend, they're going to say they're not. But there's the other argument that there's no way they can do that now.
Right. And yeah, which I had not fully thought of. I mean, for me, it's always been impossible because it strikes me as politically impossible. And that's because I don't want to imagine
Sure.
that could actually be the future after the 20th century, basically, and after the promise of America, that we then turn into something that keeps out people by such a crude category.
Sure, absolutely.
And we trumpet for so long, you know, I mean, kind of freedom of faith is really important in this country. One of the ways in which we could tie to the conversation we've been having so far is to emphasize how crude of a category that is. You know, we live in a world where, I mean, just Amazon has a much more sophisticated view of everybody who buys books than to say that they're a Muslim or non-Muslim. You know, like non-state actors have a more sophisticated understanding than this crude notion of like you're Muslim or not Muslim. So I think that it speaks of it's in that sense it's almost prehistoric, where it's not tied to, you know, the way actual state actors go out and see us. You know, when they're looking at kind of someone trying to figure out whether they're threatening or not. And well, like if you're just a Muslim, that's not sufficient because we live in a world of 1.6 billion Muslims, right? It's so there's a real disconnect there, I think, because it's presented as a kind of solution, as something instrumental, but it's so broad and frankly insane, in my opinion, that it can't function as that, right? If you could turn around and say like, okay, anybody who's, you know, a member of these organizations, which is what we do already, right? It was tied to them. That's the level of abstraction you need to be engaging with when you have such.
So really, what the businesses, the enterprises, are actually doing the work. I mean, they're doing the grunt work. They're collecting all this information for, you know, say selling books or whatever it may be, and the government or governments or whatever are collecting this information, again, identifying the information first. So for an example, if I were to have, say, bought books on, say, Muslim religion,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I might not be Muslim, but I've bought books on Muslim religion. And then I might have bought food, you know, certain, you know, online, certain Muslim food. I might have engaged in certain groups that deal with these things. So the target is going to go, you know, I'm going to be targeted in one way or another. You know, I'm not saying targeted negatively, but, you know,
yeah, so we're
I'm going to be identified.
Already identified and targeted, right? Because once you've bought those things on Amazon, Amazon will suggest to you to buy more of those kind of things. They will put you into a group, and then when a new such thing comes out, they'll be like, hey, Stephen, go and buy this, right? So that there's an anticipation of your own desires that's built into the private structure. But you're totally onto something when you draw attention to the interface and interconnection of the private and the public. Because there's things that private actors can do which public actors cannot, and things that public actors can do which private actors cannot. But meanwhile, both are developing much more sophisticated renditions of individuals.
And let me just say this: if I when you talk about the public and the private, one thing that just really has always irked me, okay, from the creation of, say, spam and then the try to restrict spam, is the fact that we allow the political class to be able to gather this information. They can actually send out spam.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they can get the information that others can't get. And they can use that, you know, via email, etc. And I'm talking about here in America, because we've allowed these opportunities. You know, we have allowed these exceptions, okay, to to these areas. And so when you think about it, the politicians are the ones, who have the power, much more power than, say, the government, because they're the ones who can acquire the information. They're the ones who can send out the information. That's why political lists are so important.
Yeah. No, I think a political campaign database can draw on different kinds of information in different ways than the government can, right? There's different restrictions placed on it. And
Absolutely.
It's a space we haven't fully thought about and explored yet. I think in part is the public's understanding of it is that we think that maybe just the Republicans have one database or list and the Democrats have a different one, but actually there's many more layers of information, and this is really the property of the particular campaigns. And as I was saying before, it has an afterlife as well.
Sure.
So it's
sure.
that's worth watching.
So I'm going to share screen for a second to Amazon. And we want everybody to know that, okay, so here's the book for Amazon, and you can buy it online and let people know, let Amazon and the politicians and government know.
Exactly, give it that information.
That's right, absolutely. But
that's the only way in which you can pass it is through the same forum that already exists to collect it. So
yeah. Really, but I mean, look.
The irony is thick, I know.
It's absolutely fascinating. Identify and sort. And so you can get it online. You can.
They already got 8 used and new from $23.59. It's not even out yet. Who's used it?
Right. And so basically, what it says is and actually prime student free 2-day shipping for college students.
Mm.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So the advent of information technology ushered in new forms of political power. Machine plays crucial roles in how states see, understand, and act. With scrutiny of these processes lies at the heart of identify and sort. Really interesting information. And if for those people who want more information, that's related, Trump by Ted Rail, I don't know.
See, this is what
identifying is.
Yeah,
Identifying and sorting is. So listen, we'll have to visit and revisit. We'll have to do, well, first of all, let me thank you very much. Again, listen, I want to thank you very much for a really enlightening morning to get my brain toasted and trying to figure out what I should be concerned about, but also to figure out, the opportunities that are out there if I want to use that information, effectively, and as we all do. It's a new world, and so identify and sort. Joseph, look, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss this with you.